Chapter 1. The Parcel at Dawn. If you have never seen Nero Wolfe, regard a gift as though it were a form of insult. You have missed one of the small domestic pleasures available only at the old brownstone on West 35th Street. He could do it before breakfast, after breakfast, or during the interval sacred to orchids, and on that grey Thursday morning he was doing it at 9:30 to a basket of pears sent by a client who believed fruit an adequate substitute for cash. Wolfe sat at his desk with the basket in view and distaste in possession. I was at mine opening the morning mail, glancing over bills, invitations, complaints, and one indecipherable note from a man in Yonkers who believed his wife was being influenced by radio frequencies. The room had that early day stillness it gets after Fritz has cleared breakfast and before the city's racket properly penetrates the curtains. Outside, March had laid a flat grey sheet over New York. Inside, with the books, the rugs, the globe lamp, and Wolfe, planted in his chair, like an absolute monarch, denied tribute. Things were in their proper order. Then the telephone rang. I picked it up. A male voice said, "Is this Nero Wolfe's office?" "It is. The man himself is too valuable to answer it, so you have Archie Goodwin name. Nathan Bell. I am calling from Riddle Street, at the house of Gerald Mowbray. Mr. Mowbray is dead." That was not the way most clients begin, but it beats discussing weather. "Go on," I said. "He was found in his study just after midnight. The police are here. Inspector Kramer has been notified, I believe. I am a solicitor and an old friend of Mr. Mowbray. Before he died, he received a parcel yesterday morning. A gift. Mr. Wolfe should know of it." That's an abrupt conclusion. Why should he know? Because the parcel was carefully chosen, and because Mr. Mowbray had enemies, and because if his death is murder, it was not done by accident or temper, it was arranged. I glanced at Wolfe. He had his eyes shut, which meant he was listening with both of them. "What was in the parcel?" I asked. "A silver letter opener, quite costly, a bottle of excellent whiskey, and a handwritten card inviting him to a private word that evening, signed." "Number, did Mr. Mowbray meet with someone?" "Yes, or meant to. He refused to say whom. By midnight he was dead in his study, with the gift resting neatly on the desk beside him. That had shape enough to interest a cat. It interested Wolfe more. He opened one eye and crooked a finger. I handed him the telephone. "Nero Wolfe speaking," he said. "You may now improve your account by omitting panic and adding facts." I listened to the half of it that was ours. Wolfe asked 3 questions, grunted twice, and said, "Remain available. Say nothing to the police about this call unless required. My assistant will come." He hung up and looked at me. "Archie, Riddle Street. Annie Moore." "Yes, Gerald Mowbray, retired dealer in rare books. Numerous enemies. A parcel arrives yesterday morning containing a silver letter opener, a bottle of whiskey, and an unsigned card requesting a private word that evening. Mowbray is later found dead in his study. The new gift lies on the desk beside him. I got my hat. Cause of death. Uncertain. Dace says the police surgeon has not yet pronounced. There was no obvious disorder in the room, no sign of theft, and no sign of forced entry." "That's inconsiderate." Wolfe leaned back. "I told you once, Archie, and apparently must tell you again, generosity is rarely fatal unless it has been addressed with care. That sounds polished enough to frame. It was not polished for your benefit. Go." I went. Riddle Street was one of those old Manhattan blocks, which had once been proud. Then shabby, then determined to become proud again because the rent had discovered ambition. Gerald Mowbray's house stood midway down the row, a brownstone with narrow steps, iron railings that wanted repainting, and windows too full of books to admit much daylight. A patrolman at the door inspected me with the bored suspicion of his class, then let me in when I handed over my name and Kramer's. The hall told me most of what I needed. Before anyone spoke, Gerald Mowbray had lived among paper, the way some men live among relatives, not always happily, but with complete dependence. Books were in the front room, on the stairs, in wall cases, on tables, and stacked in temporary towers which had clearly become permanent 3 winters ago. The air had that fine dry smell old books give off when they have been shut up with coal heat and good leather. Nathan Bell met me in the hall. He was thin, 50-ish, smooth-faced, and so neat that his dark suit appeared to have been ironed while he was still in it, the kind of man who folds grief before showing it. "Mr. Goodwin," he said, "thank you for coming. I'm not here for gratitude. Show me the room." He led me through the back parlor and into a study that faced a tiny garden, with a brick wall and a leafless tree performing useless duty. The dead man had been removed, but he had not taken the room with him. The study was large enough to hold a desk, 2 reading chairs, cabinets, and 6 wall cases loaded to collapse. On the desk, under a green-shaded lamp, stood the bottle of whiskey, and beside it, a long velvet case open to display a silver letter opener. Fine work too, heavy handle, old-style blade, engraved with a scroll pattern and initials not those of Gerald Mowbray. A white card lay flat between them. Kramer had not arrived yet, or if he had not begun by pocketing things. "Found like that?" I asked. "Yes," Dace said, "exactly so." I bent over the card without touching it. Cream stock, expensive. The handwriting was neat, upright, and educated without vanity. "For Mr. Gerald Mowbray, a token in memory of older courtesies. May I ask the favor of a private word this evening, at 9, no signature." "That's cozy," I said. Dace made a movement that might have been agreement. Gerald had received gifts before. Dealers, collectors, rivals, making peace. Clients currying favor, but this one unsettled him. Why? He said it was too intelligent. I turned. That's a phrase. It was Gerald's phrase. He looked at the parcel and said, "This is too intelligent by half." Then he laughed and put it aside. But he kept looking at the card. Did he guess who sent it? If he did not tell me. Dace spread his hands. The maid took it. She said only that he wore a cap and was forgettable. Best uniform in New York. I took in the room. No sign of struggle. One chair drawn slightly forward. An ashtray with 2 cigar stubs and 1 cigarette end. A decanter at the side table untouched. The whiskey in the gift bottle appeared untouched, standing there more as display than refreshment. How did Mowbray die? Dace lowered his voice, though there was no body to overhear. Dr. Elwyn, his physician, says heart failure might at first have seemed enough to explain it, but Gerald was found collapsed near the hearth chair, one hand on the arm of it, and the other fallen toward the rug. His face. He stopped. Yes, as if he had been startled, and then angry. I let that sit. Who found him? The housekeeper, Mrs. Vale, at midnight. She had heard nothing earlier, because Gerald often sat late over papers. When he did not answer, she entered and saw him. Was the front door locked? Yes, but Gerald frequently admitted callers himself and disliked interference. Who was in the house last night? Des counted. Mrs. Vale, Helen Mowbray, his niece, who lives in the house, Iris Dane, Gerald's secretary, who had stayed late over correspondence, Julian Kester, an appraiser who had come to discuss a catalogue entry and remained for dinner. Were all of you present at 9? Number Kester left shortly before. Helen had gone upstairs. The house had gone quiet by 9:15, and only Gerald's voice was clearly heard from the study. Only his. Yes, he had the habit of talking over people. That can shorten life. Before Dace could answer, a voice behind me said, "It shortens patience too, Goodwin." I turned. Inspector Kramer had arrived, large, red-faced, irritable, and in no mood to be pleased, by finding me where he had just reached. He looked from Dace to the desk to me and grunted. "What are you doing here?" "Morning exercise." "Try it in a gym. That doesn't have books." He advanced to the desk and studied the gift. "Wolf sent you." He did. Kramer scowled harder. Of course he did. A dead man with fancy stationery and silver on the desk is catnip to that genius upstairs. He says, generosity is rarely fatal unless it has been addressed with care. Kramer snorted. He said that, he would. He turned to Dace. "Have you been talking too much?" Dace answered with loyally restraint, only enough to answer questions. "Then save some for mine." Kramer looked at me again. "Touch nothing." I hadn't planned to improve it. He went to the door and barked for his man. I used the interval. "Who are the enemies?" I asked Dace quietly. Dace looked at the shelves, not at me. Where books and money meet, enemies breed. But in Gerald's case there were particulars. He had a business rival, Victor Sloane, with whom he had quarreled over more than one manuscript purchase and never reconciled. He had old financial entanglements with Nathan Bell, and there was his niece, Helen Mowbray, who lived under his roof and depended on him more than either of them liked. Family is always a comfort. Dace gave me a dry glance. Helen lived under Gerald's roof with too little money and too much family pride, and Gerald enjoyed making dependents feel like tribute. Did Stephen send gifts? Stephen sent demands. That was one to keep. Kramer's man came in with an evidence envelope and a little notebook. Kramer started his routine. I let him, because he hates being helped more than he hates being alone. That left me free to look at the study from the outside in. The windows were locked. The garden door was bolted. The desk had a central drawer partly open. Inside were correspondence, sealing wax, a pair of spectacles, and a loaded revolver. Loaded and apparently untouched. That meant Mowbray had not expected physical danger, or had expected it in the abstract and done nothing useful about it, which is common. The silver letter opener interested me more. It was the sort of object chosen by someone who knew Mowbray's trade, his vanity, and the likely arrangement of his desk. Not flashy. Apartment the Whiskey 2, old, expensive, and not sentimental. Whoever sent the parcel knew how to flatter a man without seeming to flatter him. That takes acquaintance. Iris Dane arrived while I was still thinking that. She was perhaps 30, dark, haired, composed, and more tired than willing to show, with the air of a woman used to order and not much given to explanations. She paused in the doorway, saw Kramer, saw me, and then saw the desk. Her mouth tightened. "Must this continue in public?" she asked Dace. "It must continue somewhere," he said. Kramer turned. "You're Miss Bell, yes. You worked for Mowbray, part-time. You know anything about that parcel?" Her eyes flicked to the card and away, only that it came yesterday morning and unsettled him. "Why?" He asked whether I recognized the handwriting, and later whether Miss Dane did. "That landed," I said. "Did you?" She looked at me and then at Kramer, deciding which wolf had better manners. "No," she said. "At least, not with confidence." Kramer glared, but I had asked it first. She hesitated. Some uneducated older. Perhaps a man who had written many formal notes in his life. Gerald said it was written by someone who wanted to appear calm. "That was better than most people notice," Kramer said. "Did he name anybody? Number did he have an appointment at 9? He said he expected a visitor and was not to be interrupted. "And you obeyed?" Her mouth thinned. "Yes." "Who was in the house after 9? She listed them, matching Dace's account. "Good," I asked. "What was Gerald like when he expected this visitor?" She turned to me again, and the look was direct. He was not afraid. He was offended, which meant he believed he knew the kind of person who had dared address him that way. That was even better. A man can be afraid of many things, but offended means recognition. It means he thinks he knows who has dared. I stayed another half hour collecting edges. Mrs. Vale, the housekeeper, proved stout, dry, and exact. She had carried the parcel in herself and said Gerald had opened it at breakfast with the kind of face he saved for invoices and bishops. Julian Kester, absent when I arrived, was expected back later. Helen Mowbray had not yet appeared again, and Victor Sloane's name produced silence, which is often more useful than talk. When I got back to the brownstone, Wolf was where all sound reasoning begins and ends, in his chair, with beer within reach and appetite under firm management. "Well," he said. I gave it to him whole, from Dace's call to Iris Dane's description of Mowbray as offended rather than afraid. Wolf listened with his eyes half shut, only opening them fully when I described the parcel. "A silver letter opener," he murmured. "A bottle of whiskey. A card asking for a private word, admirably selected. Because each object flatters a separate weakness, trade, taste, and curiosity. The sender knew Mowbray. That was my bright thought too. Yes, but mine is better." He took a sip of beer. "What do you think killed him? Not the obvious use of the letter opener. No blood, no struggle. Poison in the whiskey is possible, but too plain if the bottle is left there, like a visiting card. Heart failure is possible too. But then why the parcel? Excellent. The gift is not incidental. It is the doorbell of the crime." I leaned back, and Mowbray was offended. "Yes," Wolf's eyes narrowed. "That may be the best fact you brought me. A frightened man expects danger. An offended man expects insolence. Therefore the sender was not merely unknown, but presumptuous. Meaning family rival, former partner, or somebody with a grievance big enough to dine on." "Precisely, Archie. Tomorrow morning you will return to Riddle Street and learn more of Victor Sloane, Helen Mowbray, Julian Kester, and Miss Bell. Also discover whether the silver letter opener was newly purchased, whether the whiskey can be traced, and whether anyone besides Iris Dane was asked to identify the handwriting. And tonight, I think. That seems restful." "No," Wolf said, closing his eyes. "It is work." That was chapter 1, as it should begin, with a neat desk, a fine gift, a dead bookseller, and more civility in the trap than in the victim. Gerald Mowbray had received a parcel at dawn and died by midnight, with its contents arranged beside him as if for inventory. Somewhere in that arrangement was the killer's vanity, because murderers nearly always leave some. The trick, as Wolf would say, is not to overlook it, merely because it arrives wrapped in silver. Chapter 2. The man who received too much by 10 o'clock the next morning. I knew 3 things about Gerald Mowbray. First, he had died in a room full of books and bad feeling. Second, whoever sent him the parcel had known his weaknesses better than some people know their own birthdays. Third, if half of what I had heard about him was true, the late Gerald had spent 40 years building resentments as carefully as he had built his inventory. That interested Wolf less as morality than as mechanics. A man who is broadly disliked offers too many motives and too little shape. Wolf distrusts abundance unless it can be sorted. He was at his desk when I came down from the plant rooms after our conference over coffee, and he looked exactly as he always looks when he has decided other people will now do the moving for him, large, settled, and as destructive as a landslide if approached from the wrong angle. "Well," he said, "you sent me back for facts and relationships. I have both, though some of the relationships qualify as diseases. Good begin with the dead man. Gerald Mowbray prized possession over affection. That came from 3 directions at once, which makes it solid. He collected books, manuscripts, debts, grudges, and obligations. He had a talent for acquiring what other people could not afford to lose and then reminding them who held it." Wolf grunted. "A vulgar form of power, but common. He also had household habits any murderer could memorize. Breakfast alone at 8, study from 9 until luncheon, drinks at 6 unless occupied in bullying somebody. He hated being interrupted, admired expensive workmanship, and had a weakness for gifts that flattered his judgment." Wolf opened his eyes a fraction wider. "There, the parcel was not bait for greed. It was bait for vanity. That was your phrase before breakfast. Yes, it remains mine." I sat at my desk and opened the notebook. The household is smaller and nastier than I first thought. Helen Mowbray, his niece, lives in the house and has done so for 2 years since her father's death left her, with too little money and too much family pride. She is wary, self-controlled, and not under the delusion that her uncle loved anybody. Iris Dane is the secretary, 30-ish, efficient, dark-haired, with the manner of a woman who can sort correspondence, preserve her dignity and despise a man without wrinkling her cuffs. She has been with Gerald 5 years. and the others. Victor Sloan, business rival, dealer, appraiser, occasional litigant, and old enemy with enough shared history to stock a lawsuit all by himself. Nathan Bell, longtime friend turned creditor. That sounds odd until you know Gerald had borrowed from him, then delayed repayment out of habit and pleasure. Wolf's brows moved. Friend turned creditor? Yes, they had known each other 30 years. Bell claims loyalty, but the kind that comes with ledgers. Reasonable. He shut his eyes. Proceed. I had gone back to Riddle Street at 9:30. Mrs. Vale had admitted me with the expression of a woman who would have preferred plague if it arrived with cleaner shoes. Helen Mowbray received me in the morning room, where the tea service looked English, and the atmosphere looked armed. She was perhaps 30, fair in a restrained way, dressed with intelligence rather than money, and she had the sort of face that might have been called cold by men who dislike meeting resistance before noon. She was not cold, she was simply careful, which in that house had probably been a survival habit. "You are Mr. Goodwin," she said. "My uncle mentioned you once after reading about your employer in the papers." He called Nero Wolfe a man who charged by the syllable. That was one of his kind judgments. He had few others. She did not waste time with preliminaries, and I approved of that. "I assume that helps you. It gives me company." She almost smiled, then remembered the corpse. He enjoyed ownership more than people, books, leases, notes, obligations, family histories, anything that let him say, "This is mine and you must ask for it." "That includes you." "Yes," meaning inheritance, meaning dependence. Her voice stayed level. He never had to threaten directly. It was enough that he owned the roof, the investments, and the family legend. "And you stayed." She looked at me. "What would you have done?" "I let that one go by. Good answers sometimes only make people less useful." I asked about the parcel. "He was pleased by it," she said. Then suspicious. Then pleased again. That was his order with most compliments. "Did he know who sent it?" "He thought he did." "Who?" He would not say. But she folded her hands. He asked whether Victor Sloan had lately adopted decent stationery, then whether Nathan Bell still wrote with the same old-fashioned precision. He was fishing, not confiding. That was something. "Did he show you the card?" "Yes." "Recognize the hand?" "Number did Iris Dane?" Her eyes shifted the smallest amount. He asked Iris too. "Where's Salt?" She said no. That was worth remembering. I went from Helen to Iris Dane in the study annex, where she was sorting correspondence with the unromantic speed of a woman who expects the dead to leave paperwork and resents them for it. She looked up once and measured me without visible effort. "Mr. Goodwin, Miss Dane. You have the advantage. You work for Nero Wolfe. That allows people to assume you know more than you do. It also allows me to ask questions with a straight face. That talent is individual, not professional." I liked her a little and distrusted it. She confirmed Gerald's habits in useful detail. He liked parcels opened in his presence. He distrusted anonymous gifts in theory and yielded to them in practice if they were intelligently chosen. He admired fine silver, better whiskey, and any gesture that implied his importance had been noticed by an equal. He also despised crudeness. "So," I said, "whoever sent the parcel had to know he'd answer flattery, but reject pleading." "Obviously. Did he have enemies educated enough to flatter him well?" "Too many." "Victor Sloan?" "Yes." "Nathan Bell?" "Yes." "Helen?" She looked directly at me. "Not in that style." I marked the phrase. "Did you recognize the handwriting on the card?" "Number that came promptly and smoothly, which did not improve it." "Did Gerald have an appointment at 9 often?" "Private ones." "Yes." "And last night?" "He told me not to disturb him. He was in a mood of anticipatory contempt." "That sounds promising." It was ordinary. I asked about Sloan and Bell. She gave them to me cleanly enough. Victor Sloan had once lost a valuable manuscript to Gerald in a contested purchase and never forgiven either the loss or the manner of it. Nathan Bell had extended loans more than once against temporary shortages in Gerald's accounts, and had then discovered that collecting from an old friend is harder than lending to one. Both knew Gerald's habits. Both knew his ego. Both knew that a gift properly chosen would get closer to him than a threat. That was the chapter's center. Really, murderers prefer to summon vanity rather than force obedience. If you threaten a man like Gerald Mowbray, he locks a drawer and reaches for a revolver. If you flatter him, he seats you by the lamp and offers a glass. By noon, I had Victor Sloane in a back office on 4th Avenue among rare bindings and common dishonesty. He was handsome in the polished reptile style, 50-ish, immaculate, and amused by everything except loss. He admitted hating Gerald with pleasing frankness. "Hating is too simple," he said. I respected his eye and loathed his methods. We were natural colleagues. "Did you send him a silver letter opener and whiskey? Number? Would you have known they'd please him?" "Of course. So would anyone who had sold him so much as a prayer book." "Did he ever wrong you?" Victor's smile sharpened, repeatedly, but never in a way the law could afford to notice. "And the handwriting?" "I have not seen the card. I showed him a copy I had made. He studied it and shook his head, educated, deliberate, trying not to reveal itself. That usually means someone who fears recognition more than discovery." That was neat enough to take home. Nathan Bell was different. I found him in an office near Madison, broader, grayer, and more visibly tired by years than his clothes admitted. His friendship with Gerald had not died cleanly, it had curdled. "Yes," he said. "I lent him money 3 times. The last 2 should have warned me against the third. Yet you remained friends." He looked at me without humor. Men who know one another for 30 years do not become strangers merely because one of them turns into an ungrateful swine. That is almost affectionate. It is historical. He knew Gerald's habits too, knew his taste in whiskey, his liking for fine silver, his susceptibility to gestures that implied deference while actually managing him. When I asked whether he had sent the parcel, he said no, with a gravity that wanted to be trusted. "Would you have been admitted privately at 9 if you had sent such a card?" "Yes," he said. Which is exactly why I would never have used that method too obvious. Back at the brownstone, I gave Wolf the lot. He listened with his head back and eyes shut. The universal sign that his brain was not only busy but probably annoyed. "When I finished," he said, "Good. We have what we need to begin. That sounds premature. Number it sounds exact." He opened his eyes. Gerald Mowbray was a man who prized possession over affection. Therefore, anyone intimate with his habits knew that direct force would fail where calculated tribute would succeed. Helen Mowbray knew it. Iris Dane knew it. Victor Sloane knew it. Nathan Bell knew it. The parcel was not merely a gift, but a key fitted to a particular lock. I nodded. "And all 4 had reasons to resent him." "Yes, but resentment is cheap. Knowledge is dearer." He reached for the beer, drank, and set the glass down with care. "Miss Dane interests me." Because she answered too smoothly. Because she understyles. Her remark, that Helen would not employ that style, was instructive. She's observant. Indeed, also, Bell interests me because old friendship confers knowledge no rivalry can counterfeit, and Sloane because professional hostility often masks close study. And Helen. Wolf's lips moved. "Family knows habits, best and motives worst. We shall require more." Outside, the afternoon had darkened early, and the city beyond the curtains gave off that muffled winter, end sound of taxis, brakes, and wet pavement upstairs. The orchids were absorbing heat and mystery without comment. Down in the office, Wolf had already reduced a houseful of grievance to something more useful, opportunity shaped by taste. Gerald Mowbray had received too much in life and mistaken accumulation for mastery. That was the kind of error murderers appreciate. A man who values possession above affection can often be approached through the very objects he thinks he commands. The silver letter opener, the whiskey, the card with its private invitation. None of them forced him to obedience. They summoned his vanity and let him walk toward danger under his own roof. Wolf, who prefers reason to movement and never flatters unless cornered, saw that at once the killer had not dragged Gerald Mowbray anywhere. He had merely sent him exactly what he wanted to receive. Chapter 3. The card in the box. There are gifts that announce affection, gifts that apologize, gifts that boast, and gifts that amount to little more than invoices wrapped in ribbon. The parcel sent to Gerald Mowbray belonged to a rarer class. It did not merely please him, it selected him. That was Wolf's view by Friday evening, and since it happened to coincide with mine except in precision, I let him keep the better phrasing. The card lay on his desk between the blotter and the beer glass, under a lamp that gave it more attention than most men receive in life. I had brought back a careful copy, and Wolf had looked at it 6 times, which for him is the literary equivalent of a confession. He read it again aloud without drama, because he despises drama in others and practices it expertly himself. For Mr. Gerald Mowbray, a token in memory of older courtesies. If you will grant me a private word after dark, I believe we may come to a profitable understanding. I ask only that I find you alone at 9. He set it down. No signature. Good paper, good hand. Formal but not stiff. Modest but not humble. That sounds like a matrimonial advertisement. It sounds, Wolf said, like bait. I was at my desk with my feet planted where Fritz would not see them and object on ethical grounds. You've said that twice. You're in love with it. Number, you're nourished by it. That is different. I let that pass and took up the thread. Helen Mowbray was useful after all. She says Gerald laughed when he read the card. Wolf grunted. You omitted that on first report. I was saving it for your old age. Archie, yes, sir. He laughed, and not sourly either. According to her, he looked almost delighted. She said it was as if he believed himself admired at last. Wolf's eyes half closed. There, that is central. Because Gerald didn't merely accept the invitation, he enjoyed the tone. Yes, a man may distrust a gift and still respond to it if vanity is engaged. Mowbray was a collector of deference. Whoever wrote that card offered him a flavor he liked. I thought about Gerald in his study, the silver letter opener opened like a medal, the whiskey standing by, and that little cream card, telling him he was still a man of consequence to someone who knew how to speak his language. Profitable understanding, I said. Wolf looked at me. What? I checked my notes. Helen remembered more than I gave you earlier. The exact phrase, or near enough, was that the visitor hoped for a profitable understanding and begged the favor of privacy. Gerald read that and laughed. Wolf sat up a fraction. Why did you not begin with that? Because then you'd have had no chance to insult me later. I read it exactly. I did. It ran for Mr. Gerald Mowbray, a token in memory of older courtesies. If you will grant me a private word after dark, I believe we may come to a profitable understanding. I ask only that I find you alone at 9. Wolf took a breath through his nose. That is one of his ways of approving the universe reluctantly. Yes, he said. Better, much better. Because the note offers 3 separate temptations: gratitude, memory of older courtesies, profit, a profitable understanding, and secrecy, alone at 9. It flatters his past conduct, promises advantage in the future, and isolates him in the present. That's quite a day's work for 4 lines. Precisely, the gift was not merely a present, it was a key meant to open a private hour. That was Wolf at his best, when he stopped sounding like a large, irritated man in a chair, and starts sounding like an intelligence with a beer mug. He said. Helen also, said Gerald, told no one who he expected. Yes. Wolf's finger tapped the copied card once. That too is central. You think he knew? He suspected. More importantly, he wished others not to know. That means either the sender's identity would have provoked protest, or Mowbray hoped to control the interview for his own advantage before anyone else could interfere, such as squeezing money from Bell, terms from Sloane, or obedience from someone in the house. Quite. The room was quiet, except for traffic muttering beyond the curtains, and the little clock on the mantel, asserting that time exists even when Wolf prefers not to notice it. The old brownstone had taken on its evening stillness. Upstairs, the orchids were having their regulated climate. Somewhere in the rear Fritz was producing dinner, with the kind of concentration priests envy, I said. There's another angle, the note says. Older courtesies. That could be sincere, false, or mocking, yes. Gerald laughed, which suggests he didn't read it as gratitude from a subordinate. He read it as someone clever enough to stroke him with his own legend. Wolf's eyes opened fully. Excellent. Archie at last. That sounds almost like praise. It is not. It is relief. I ignored that. So the hand is restrained on purpose. The note doesn't want to be recognized immediately, but it does want to sound like the sort of person Gerald would admit privately. A crude enemy would threaten, plead, or bluster. This writer understood indirection. I rose and crossed to the window, then back. Helen thinks Gerald was pleased because he believed himself admired at last. That is too sentimental, Wolf said. From you. Yes, from her. No. He made a face. Admired is not the word. A man like Mowbray does not hunger for admiration in the common sense. He hungers for tribute from equals, or those pretending to be equals. The note granted him importance. Close enough. I sat again, and went on with what I had squeezed out of Helen in the second interview. She had found Gerald in unusual good humor before dinner, not warm, because warmth was apparently a condition he regarded as vulgar, but animated. He had gone so far as to ask whether the silver was Georgian or merely pretending. He had even arranged the bottle on the desk at 6 and pronounced the choice excellent, which in his dialect was nearly an embrace. And then, Wolf asked. He put the card in his pocket. That got him. His pocket? Yes, Helen noticed, because Gerald usually discarded notes once he had extracted whatever pleasure there was in them. This one he kept. Which pocket? Breast. Wolf leaned back. And was it found there? Number. It was on the desk in the study when the body was found. He nodded. Then he took it out for the interview, naturally. I said, or to compare the handwriting with something else. He looked at me, perhaps. That was enough to give me hope I had earned half a biscuit. He shut his eyes and spoke as if dictating to the room. The sender intended Mowbray to come armed, only with curiosity and vanity. No witnesses, no announced appointment, a private hour made possible by language, chosen with exactness. Therefore the card is not incidental to the crime. It is the crime's instrument. More than the silver. Yes, the silver and whiskey secured his attention. The card directed his conduct. That straightened it all out. The parcel without the note would have been merely elegant bribery. The note without the parcel might have been ignored. Together they worked like matched tools. I said, "What do you make of the hand?" A practiced disguise, but not a complete one. You can read character from loops again. I can read caution. The writer suppressed individuality but not education. Upright strokes, measured spacing, no flourish, no haste. A person accustomed to writing formal notes and determined not to be known by one. That still leaves Bell, Sloane, Iris Dane, half the Bar Association, and a bishop with a grudge. Yes, but not Helen. Because she would not choose that style. I smiled. Iris said exactly that. Wolf grunted. Then Miss Dane is observant, which may later inconvenience her. There was a pause while he reached for the beer and took a long swallow, contemplating the card as if it were a witness who had almost admitted something, and then remembered counsel. At length he said, "Archie." "Yes, tomorrow you will see Bell again and ask him whether he has ever used the phrase profitable understanding in correspondence." Then Sloane, same question. Also obtain samples of Miss Dane's hand if possible, and of Helen's. Not because I think either wrote the note, but because comparison sharpens exclusion. That's an elegant way to keep me walking. It is the only elegant way to use you. I accepted that, since he was paying the rent and partly my salary too. Before dinner, I went once more over the little copy of the card in my notebook. 4 lines, no signature, no threat. Nothing in it that would alarm an ordinary man. But Gerald Mowbray had not been ordinary. He had been a man who prized possession over affection and had built a life on taking what others guarded. The note offered him one more acquisition, a private understanding, profitable if handled correctly, and private enough to leave no witnesses at the door. Helen had said he seemed almost delighted, as though he believed himself admired at last. Wolf had corrected that. Admired was too soft. Gerald believed himself addressed as a man whose favor still mattered, whose memory of older courtesies could be invoked, whose judgment could be flattered, and whose greed, whether for money, advantage, or superiority, could still be tempted into opening the study after dark. That was the point. The sender did not need to force obedience. He only needed to speak in the right tone. By the time Fritz announced dinner, Wolf had reduced the parcel to its true function. The silver and whiskey were the wrapping. The card was the mechanism. It was not merely a message enclosed in a box. It was a key cut to Gerald Mowbray's vanity and meant to open one private hour under his own roof. Chapter 4. The quiet study door that evening. The brownstone on West 35th Street was conducting itself according to rule, which is to say that Fritz was producing dinner with devotion. Theodore was somewhere upstairs behaving like a monk among orchids, and Nero Wolfe was in the office pretending to read while actually chewing on murder. The card lay on his desk again. Beside it, at his insistence, I had placed a rough pencil sketch of Gerald Mowbray's study, as I had seen it. Desk near the lamp, reading chairs opposite, hearth to the left, bookcases everywhere, and the door opening from the passage at an angle that let a visitor enter half the room before being fully seen from the chair by the fire. Wolfe had looked at the sketch for 10 minutes without a sound. Then he said, "No forced entry, no theft, no disturbance. Therefore the room was not invaded. It was received. That sounds civilized. It is lethal." He shifted in the chair. A man who expects danger does not dismiss servants early and sit alone with a costly gift, an open bottle and a decorative blade. A man who expects an interview under favorable conditions does exactly that. I said, "Helen told me he sent Mrs. Vale off before 10. Yes. And Iris left earlier with correspondence. Gerald said he wanted no interruptions." Also yes. Then he made the room private on purpose. Obviously. That was Wolfe when the facts suited him. If they didn't, he called them stupid. The next morning, I went back to Riddle Street and spent most of it extracting from the house and its inmates the sort of details they are always sure they have mentioned, when in fact they have carefully omitted them. Gerald Mowbray's death had now settled into that stage where mourning and curiosity are both active and each suspects the other of vulgarity. Mrs. Vale proved best at structure. She had been housekeeper to Gerald for 11 years and regarded loyalty as a duty not incompatible with accurate dislike. Yes, he sent us off early. She told me in the dining room while a tray sat untouched at her elbow. Not me to bed exactly, but out of his way. He said he would ring if he wanted anything, and if he didn't ring, he wanted nothing. That was Mr. Mowbray all over. At what time? 10 o'clock for the maid, about 1:30 for me. You saw anyone come? Number. He was in the study then. Yes, sir. Door shut, lamp on under it. I heard his chair move once. What about the front door? He often answered it himself if he expected somebody. Hated having callers announced when he thought it made him look old. That sounds vain enough to be useful. She looked at me with no warmth. It often was, to him. The front door interested me. Mrs. Vale swore she had fastened the chain earlier, but Gerald had the habit of removing it when waiting for a late caller. No forced lock, no scraped jamb, no lifted window, no nonsense. Somebody came by the front entrance or not at all. Helen Mowbray was more interesting because grief had sharpened rather than softened her. I found her in the back parlor with a ledger open and no visible interest in its contents. My uncle was in excellent spirits after dinner, she said. By his standards. That still leaves room for homicide. She ignored it. He dismissed me at 9:45. I had gone in to ask whether he wanted his account books brought up in the morning. He said no, and added that I was not to sit up on his account because he expected a short interview, and then bed. Short. That was his word. Did he say with whom? Number he enjoyed withholding names almost as much as money. Was the parcel still in the study? Yes. The bottle had been opened. The silver letter opener was out of its case and lying on the desk. That mattered, as a tool or display. Display, I thought. My uncle liked apt objects where he could see them. Did he ever use letter openers as paper knives, threats, or stage property? A flicker at the mouth. All three. She told me one more thing then, and it was good enough to brighten the morning. When I was at the door, she said. He was standing by the hearth, not the desk. He had the card in his hand. I sat up a little, reading it again. I think so. And the gift on the desk arranged. The bottle, the case, the opener, all absurdly neat. That was Gerald all over, preparing for a private talk, the way another man might arrange troops. I found Iris Dane upstairs in the small room she used for correspondence. She was packing papers into labeled envelopes with that smooth competence which in women is often called coldness by men who prefer confusion. Mr. Goodwin. Miss Dane, did Gerald Mowbray often rehearse for visitors? She glanced up. Rehearse? Arrange himself? The room, his props. He arranged everything. Visitors merely noticed it later. That sounds like yes. Yes. She admitted that Gerald had opened the whiskey before dinner and sampled it with evident approval. He had also polished the silver letter opener with his handkerchief, which was a charming touch if you admire dead men only on paper. And after dinner, I asked. He told me I was free to go. He said he required privacy. Was that common? Not unusual. With callers, with negotiations. There was the word. You thought this was business. I thought it was some species of transaction, with Gerald, that covered most human relations. Did you hear the visitor arrive? Number leave? Number, but someone came. Yes, that's conviction. She looked at me directly. Gerald Mowbray did not die alone with his own anticipation. Someone came, spoke with him, and left. The room said so. I liked that because it happened to agree with me. Gerald alive, and alert at roughly 9:45. Study, door shut, lamp on, parcel arranged. At some point before 11, a visitor admitted, quietly. No raised voices, no crash, no servant summoned, no sign of struggle. By midnight, Gerald dead beside the hearth, not at the desk, with one hand near the chair arm and the other closer to the rug than if he had simply gone to sleep. Julian Kester added a little when I caught him at his office. He had left before the expected meeting, but told me Gerald had been in that peculiarly dangerous mood of a man expecting to outplay somebody. He was almost merry, Kester said. Not happy. Gerald lacked the necessary organs for that, but sharpened, like a man with cards up his sleeve. Did he mention who was coming? Number, he only said. At last one of them has remembered how to knock. That line went straight into my pocket. Back at the brownstone, I delivered the lot to Wolf in good order. He was in his chair with his eyes shut, which meant either meditation or irritation. With him the two often share a wall. When I finished, he opened his eyes and said, Excellent. That is high praise from Nero Wolfe. He once said it to Fritz about duck. So, I said. The victim arranged the scene himself. Study ready, gift displayed. Letter opener out. Whiskey opened. Card in hand, servants dismissed. Door to be answered personally. Yes. And no struggle. Yes. And no theft. Yes. And no forced entry. Archie, if you intend to continue by catechism, I shall require a priest's collar. I grinned. Just tightening the bolts. He leaned back. Do so silently. The point is plain, Gerald Mowbray admitted the visitor willingly. Because he believed the visitor came under the protection of the gift. Precisely. That was Wolfe's phrase, and it improved the thing at once. The parcel had not only invited the meeting, it had vouched for the caller. Gerald did not open the study door to a stranger or enemy in the raw. He opened it to the sender of the silver, the whiskey, and the card. The person who had shown sufficient taste to deserve a private hearing, I said. Then whoever came didn't have to bluff at the door. The bluff had already been made that morning. Yes, the parcel was advanced credentials. He took a sip of beer and went on. Observe also the absence of disorder. No struggle means one of three things. First, sudden natural death before conflict. Second, poison or some comparable hidden attack. Third, an encounter so controlled, trusted, or brief that resistance never developed. You don't like the first. Number it is always possible and almost always vulgar. And the second. I neither like nor dislike it yet. The whiskey is obvious, therefore suspicious. The letter opener is decorative, therefore also suspicious. A good murderer may place two possible instruments where they can distract from the true one. That sounds cheerful. It is accurate. I got up and walked to the globe, spun it half an inch, and came back. Here's what keeps teasing me. If Gerald expected to profit from the interview, why is there no sign of papers out? No contract, no ledger, no note ready for terms. Wolf's eyes narrowed. Because he expected first to hear an offer, not conclude one. He was baited by promise, not by detail. The phrase was profitable understanding, not agreement. That was good enough to irritate me because I hadn't seen it first. So the card opens the door, I said, and keeps the house quiet. The sender knows Gerald will arrange privacy himself because vanity loves secrecy when it thinks it controls the terms. Yes. And once the visitor is inside, Wolf settled deeper into the chair. Then everything depends on recognition, your cognition. Did Gerald know at once who had come? Did that increase his confidence, his irritation, or his alarm? We know only that no struggle followed. Therefore, the early minutes of the interview were not hostile in any ordinary sense. I considered that Gerald standing by the hearth with the card in his hand. The knock, the door opening, a face he knew, perhaps even one he expected. A few words, maybe a drink offered, maybe not. Then, somewhere inside that quiet half-hour death. No cry, no crash, no theft, no torn room, just a man who had opened his study because the gift had made the visitor admissible. Wolf said, "The quiet study door is the fact to hold murderers who employ force, risk, noise, delay, resistance, witnesses. Murderers with intelligence prefer invitation. They arrange that the victim shall cooperate in his own isolation. That has style. It has economy." The room had gone still. Outside, the city moved under a sky the color of old paper. Upstairs, the orchids were receiving their climate. In the kitchen, Fritz would be contemplating butter, with the seriousness some men reserve for war. And in the office, with the copied card on the desk and my rough sketch of Gerald Mowbray's study beside it, Wolf had reduced the murder to its cleanest proposition yet. Gerald had not been hunted through windows or surprised in an alley. He had not been bullied into opening the door, nor tricked at the last moment by some crude lie on the stoop. The trick had come hours earlier in a box lined with taste. By the time night fell, the real work had already been done. The study door had opened quietly because Gerald Mowbray believed the visitor came properly introduced, under the protection of the gift. Chapter 5. The kindness that knew too much a parcel can tell on its sender even when the sender has had the manners to omit a name. That was Wolf's view on Friday morning, and since he was planted behind his desk with the remains of breakfast inside him, and no intention of moving farther than the beer bottle, it fell to me to provide the parcel in all its respectable deceit. I had brought back the wrappings from Riddle Street by favor of Inspector Kramer, who had surrendered them with the expression of a man lending a razor to a lunatic. They lay on Wolf's desk in orderly pieces, the outer brown paper, heavy and good, the ribbon, dark blue and narrow, the box that had held the silver letter opener, the strawboard sleeve around the whiskey bottle, and the card, still the politest liar in Manhattan. Wolf examined them one by one, with the attention he usually reserved for orchids with grievances. "Well," I said after 10 minutes of respectful silence. "The sender," he replied, "was neither lazy nor ignorant. That narrows New York only a little." He ignored it. "Good wrapping paper, not shop common stock. Ribbon tied by a hand practiced at parcels, but not professional at them. The bottle chosen not because it was expensive, though it was, but because it was exactly the sort of whiskey Gerald Mowbray preferred. Old, dry, reputable, and without vulgar display. The silver letter opener selected, not as a random luxury but as an object apt to his trade and vanity. You sound as if the gift should have been thanked before it was arrested. It should be understood before it is ridiculed. He lifted the letter opener from its velvet case with 2 fingers. The thing was handsome. I had to admit it. Not flashy, not burdened with cherubs or leaves, but made with that reserved excellence which tells a man of Gerald's type that he is being saluted by somebody with breeding or a very good imitation of it. Wolf set it down. This was not chosen by a stranger, nor by a casual acquaintance. No again. He leaned back. A stranger might send a costly bottle, a fool might send silver, but to choose these particular things in this particular combination requires knowledge. The sender knew 3 habits of Mowbray's. First, his taste in drink. Second, his fondness for rare silverwork, especially objects that carried some faint professional flavor. Third, his habit of conducting delicate matters in private rather than at table or in company. That last deserved a nod. Gerald had not been a man to negotiate before witnesses if a witnessless room could be had. Privacy gave him room to condescend, retreat, threaten, or bargain without paying social tax on it later. I said, meaning the note and the objects were matched. Precisely, the bottle softened his mood, the silver flattered his eye and trade. The card directed him to the study, a trap assembled from courtesy. That has style. It has familiarity, Wolf said. Do not admire it. The room was quiet, with the late morning light slanting through the front windows and touching the tops of the bookcases. Somewhere in the hall, Fritz moved with the heavy-footed discretion of a man who knows thought is in progress and resents being left out of it. Wolf turned the wrapping paper over and flattened one corner with his thumb. See here. I got up and crossed to him. One fold had been made, unfolded, and remade. Tiny thing. The sort of thing nobody would notice unless he had spent a lifetime noticing what other people regarded as beneath the dignity of sight. Well, I asked. The sender wrapped it himself, or had it wrapped in a place where formality mattered less than speed. A professional parcel clerk does not hesitate twice over the same corner. That helps if we're hunting among amateur package artists. It helps because the gift was assembled personally. Someone cared enough to choose the objects, prepare the box, write the card, and direct the morning messenger. This was not purchased off a counter and dispatched with a shop note. I sat again. Helen told me Gerald was absurdly pleased with the silver. Yes, that interests me less than the fact that he polished it. I blinked. Iris told me that. And you repeated it. Try to remember your own usefulness. Wolf's eyes narrowed. A man does not polish a gift before meeting its sender, unless he means the object to be part of the interview. That was good. Too good, maybe. I chewed it. You mean the letter opener wasn't just bait, I said. It became stage property. Exactly. Mowbray intended the sender to see that the gift had been appreciated intelligently. That is why it was on the desk, out of the case, and why the bottle too had been opened. He was answering the courtesy by displaying discernment. Like a peacock with better tailoring, Wolf grunted. If one must have similes. I gave him more from the second round of inquiries. The whiskey brand had come from a shop on Madison that sold to careful men with money and to careless men borrowing money. The clerk remembered the purchase because the buyer had paid cash, requested no wrapping from the shop, and asked that the bottle be boxed plain. No useful description beyond a dark coat, gloves, and the universal cowardice of a brimmed hat pulled correctly. And the silver? Wolf asked. Older stock from a dealer on Lexington, not antique, but done in an older pattern. Buyer again paid cash, again wanted the maker's wrapping omitted. 2 purchases, 2 evasions, 1 intelligence. Yes. Wolf shut his eyes. The sender wished the objects traceable only by those who already understood them. Not to a name, but to a level of taste. That sounds almost social. It is murderous. I leaned back and watched him work. This is one of the advantages of being Archie Goodwin. I get a front row seat when Nero Wolfe starts turning personality into evidence. He doesn't merely ask who hated a man. Any Ali can answer that. He asks who knew the victim well enough to select exactly the thing he would trust, admire, and obey. I said. There's another point. A stranger trying to lure Gerald privately might have promised scandal, money, or threat. This sender promised a profitable understanding and enclosed proof of good breeding. Yes, which means he knew Gerald would take refinement as a credential. Yes, and probably knew Gerald would not mention the expected caller because that kind of private arrangement would please him. Archie, Wolfe said with his eyes still shut, if you continue to think correctly, I shall be forced to increase your salary and impoverish myself. I'd hate to wound you. He opened his eyes. The trap was built from familiarity. That is the essential thing. The bait was chosen by someone who understood Gerald's pride, almost as well as his greed. There it was. Pride and greed. Most people keep them in separate rooms and pretend one is furniture. Gerald Mowbray had carried both into every dealing of his life. He wanted advantage, yes, but he wanted it in a form that acknowledged his superiority. To offer him money boldly would be vulgar. To ask a favor publicly would be clumsy. To send a fine bottle, a fitting piece of silver, and a note suggesting private profit among equals. That was art. And art in crime is usually painted by somebody with proximity. I got up and crossed to the shelves, then turned back. So where does that leave our chorus? Helen, Iris, Sloane, Belle. Not Belle, Wolfe said promptly. That made me stop. Why not? Because Belle's friendship, however soured, was too old and too plain. He would know the whiskey. Yes, he might know the privacy, but the silver is wrong for him. It is too deft. Belle is a creditor, not a flatterer. That sounds like a distinction with expensive shoes. It is a distinction with meaning. Belle would seek repayment, leverage, or moral injury. This parcel sought admission through elegance. All right, Sloane. Better, a rival in trade might choose the silver exactly so. Iris certainly knew his habits. Helen also. He reached for the card again. But the hand still resists identification, which means the writer had reason to fear immediate recognition. That points not away from intimacy, but toward it. I nodded. The closer the circle, the more dangerous a familiar hand. Yes. For a while neither of us spoke. Outside, a truck banged somewhere down the block and was answered by a horn full of municipal despair. Inside, the brownstone held its own weather, warm, deliberate, insulated by books, rugs, and Wolfe's stubborn gravity. On the desk the parcel's remains lay dismembered and eloquent. I said, funny thing, the whole scheme depends on kindness. Number on the appearance of it. Same wrapping. Not at all. Kindness gives. This gave in order to summon. That was Wolfe in one line, and I let it stand. By noon he had the parcel arranged in a new order. Card, ribbon, bottle sleeve, velvet case, wrapping, a progression. He called it, from voice to credential, to reassurance, to vanity, to concealment. I thought that a little theatrical, even for him. But there was method in it, he said. Gerald Mowbray received too much because he had trained people to approach him obliquely. No one who knew him well would come with open sentiment or direct request. Therefore the sender chose the one route left, apt generosity. And apt generosity, I said, requires insider knowledge. Exactly. That closed the morning neatly. The wrapping, ribbon, and card had revealed more than the giver intended. The sender knew Gerald's preferred whiskey, his eye for silver, his love of being approached privately when delicacy or profit was hinted. Such knowledge did not belong to a messenger, an enemy at large, or a casual acquaintance. It belonged inside the ring of habit. The trap had not been built from invention, it had been built from familiarity. That was worse, because familiarity is patient. It learns a man's pride, his rituals, his weaknesses of taste, the way he likes a door opened and a compliment phrased. Whoever had sent the parcel had known Gerald Mowbray closely enough to bait not merely his greed, but his self-respect. And for Nero Wolfe, that was the first true narrowing of the field. Chapter 6. The promise of profit. By Monday morning, the case had shed one of its disguises. Until then, the parcel on Gerald Mowbray's desk could still pretend to be a social gesture sharpened into murder. A gift from an old friend, a rival's overture, a family appeal made elegant for once. But Wolfe had gone beyond that. He had the card, the silver, the whiskey, the private hour, and the quiet study door all arranged in his mind like pieces on a board. And he wanted one thing more before he called them by their proper name: profit. He was in the office after breakfast, with his eyes shut and his lips compressed, which meant he was waiting either for me or for civilization to improve. I came in with my notebook and relieved him of the second hope. "Well," he said. "Nathan Bell first," I told him. And he was finally useful enough to justify his necktie. Wolfe opened one eye. "A high standard. Proceed." Bell had received me in his office with the manner of a man who had slept badly and intended to blame others. The grey in his hair looked more determined than it had the day before, and his desk was so bare I suspected recent worry rather than permanent order. "I have already told you," he said, "that I did not send Gerald Mowbray any damned silver toy or whiskey. I know. I'm not here to improve your morning. I'm here about a manuscript. That got him. Not much, but enough." "What manuscript?" "The one Gerald was expecting someone to mention." Bell's mouth set. He was the kind of man who had practiced self-control until it became a visible muscle. "Who told you that?" "Nobody. I'm spending the day guessing correctly." He let out a breath through his nose. There was a manuscript. Lost, stolen, disputed, miscatalogued, forged, borrowed forever. Which? "Passed through doubtful hands," he said. "Years ago, a 15th century devotional text, though Gerald cared less for the prayers than for the binding and the pedigree. It vanished in the confusion after the Bellamy sale." "Your sale?" "Number, but I was involved in financing one of the bidders." "Was Gerald involved?" "Gerald was always involved where obscurity and profit could shake hands." "That had a ring to it." Bell admitted then, because he was tired enough to want truth if it could be used as a weapon, that Gerald had lately hinted someone might approach him over the manuscript. Not publicly, not through lawyers, quietly. "Why quietly?" I asked. Bell stared at me. "Because anyone trying to recover it had reasons not to advertise the chain of possession." That sounds almost as if nobody in the chain deserved clean linen. Nobody did. There it was. A lost manuscript with dirty history is a natural breeding place for blackmail, private settlements, and genteel panic. So Gerald expected an offer. "Yes." "From whom?" Bell shook his head. "He didn't say. He only remarked that desperation improves manners." I brought that back whole to Wolfe, who nodded once and made no comment except, "Go on." "Then Victor Sloane." Wolfe's brows moved the smallest fraction. "He lied better yesterday than Bell did." "Yes, but today he was in a more decorative mood." Victor Sloane had received me in his gallery room among tall cases of bindings and two collectors trying not to look underfed. He took me into a side office and closed the door with the air of a man prepared to be amused, so long as nothing cost him money. "Well, Goodwin, you and Gerald Mowbray were exchanging civilities before he died." "Never civilities, assessments." "Then assess this: Gerald expected to profit from a private caller." Sloane's smile did not vanish, it merely sharpened. "Of course he did. Gerald expected to profit from weather, funerals, and the decline of moral standards." "Anything specific?" "Yes," Sloane said. "He bragged to me 3 days ago that one person on Riddle Street would soon pay dearly for silence and courtesy. That was good enough to sit down for, so I did." Exact words. Near enough to exact. Gerald enjoyed sounding like a villain in a cheap serial when he felt triumphant. "One person on Riddle Street," I repeated, meaning someone in or near his own house. "Yes." "Did he name who?" "Number did you guess?" "I considered several candidates. Your trouble is that Gerald made himself indispensable to too many private embarrassments. You think this was about the lost manuscript? Sloane lifted a shoulder. Very likely, or about whoever had inherited the consequences of it. That went into my pocket with care. Back in the office, Wolf had taken the beer glass in both hands and was contemplating the ceiling as if reasoning might descend from it under proper pressure. When I finished, he said, "Good, very good. I'm dazzling this week. Number you are merely adequate to necessity. From you, that's laurel and trumpets." He ignored me. The phrase is central. Pay dearly for silence and courtesy. Yes, Wolf leaned forward a little. Silence and courtesy are not the language of romance, sociability, or reconciliation. They are the language of transaction under concealment. That was what had been nudging me all morning without announcing itself. Not romance, not sentiment, not old friendship, not family pleading transaction. I said, so the parcel wasn't social bait at all. Not primarily. It imitated social grace in order to prepare a commercial interview. Commercial in a dirty sense. Frequently the only profitable sense. The room had gone very still outside. Tires hissed on the damp street. Inside, the books and curtains and old furniture held the weather off and let Wolf think in peace, which is dangerous for the rest of the world. He went on. Nathan Bell gives us motive structure. Gerald expected an offer from someone desperate to recover a manuscript that had passed through questionable hands. That means the sender of the gift wanted Gerald to believe he was about to gain something, money, leverage, or advantage. Victor Sloane adds the decisive phrase, Gerald himself foresaw that someone on Riddle Street would pay for silence and courtesy. On Riddle Street, I said. That's the rub. Yes. The sender may have lived in the house, worked in it, or been closely attached to it. At minimum, Gerald thought the profit would arise there, not from some distant bookseller. Meaning Helen, Iris, Bell, if we stretch geography, some servant, or somebody using the house as center. Wolf grunted. Do not widen the circle merely for exercise. The important point is this. Gerald admitted the caller because he expected not pleasure but advantage. That changed the room in my head at once. I could see Gerald standing by the hearth with the card in his hand, not as a lonely old bookseller flattered by a gift, but as a hard man smelling profit and arranging privacy so he could bargain from strength. He was not being lured into social ease. He was preparing for a private extraction. I said, the sender wanted him isolated, not because isolation was romantic, but because it was profitable. Exactly. And the phrase silence and courtesy suggests Gerald had something to withhold. Yes, knowledge, certainly, or documents, or merely the threat of talk. I crossed to the window and looked out at the flat grey daylight over 35th Street. Then whoever sent the parcel needed Gerald to believe he held the upper hand. Of course, men like Mowbray do not meet secretly unless they think secrecy serves them, which means the gift and the note told him, in effect, you are about to be paid to keep your mouth shut and your manners polished. Wolf's eyes opened fully. That is crude, but nearly correct, I aspire. He took another swallow of beer. Now consider the corollary. If the interview began as a transaction, the killer knew Mowbray would dismiss witnesses voluntarily. He would not want Helen, Iris, or any servant overhearing terms. He would open the study, close it, and conduct the interview under his own roof, with all the solemn privacy of a confessor charging by the minute. That makes the parcel a business credential dressed as civility. Yes. There it was again. That elegance with teeth. The silver and whiskey were not signs of affection. They were advance payment in style, a way of saying, I know what pleases you, I know how you prefer to do this, and I know you are a man who should be approached not with accusation or pleading, but with tribute and opportunity. I sat down again. Where does that put Bell farther away? Because Bell knew too much plainly. He would not need the theatrical apparatus, nor would Sloane, probably. A rival might use style, but the phrase, One person on Riddle Street suggests an intimacy of household or near household pressure. So Helen or Iris, possibly. Or someone acting through one of them. Yes. That irritated me because it was true. The more we learned, the more the crime looked less like an outside blow and more like something grown from inside knowledge, inside fear, and inside opportunity, I said. There's another angle. If Gerald expected profit tied to the manuscript, then the killer had to know not just his tastes, but his current hopes. Wolf nodded. Precisely, familiarity in habit is one thing. Familiarity in expectation is another, and far more dangerous. The sender knew what topic would bring Mowbray privately to heel. That was the chapter. Right there, the promise of profit. Not love, not apology, not peace. Profit. A man like Gerald Mowbray would answer that, faster than he would answer a bell. Wolf leaned back and shut his eyes. Archie, yes? Tomorrow you will learn everything recoverable about the Bellamy manuscript sale, its subsequent history, and who on Riddle Street had reason to fear Gerald Mowbray's silence becoming expensive. That sounds like cheerful Sunday work. It sounds like progress. He was right, and that annoyed me a little. Nathan Bell had admitted Gerald was expecting an offer from someone desperate to recover a lost manuscript that had moved through questionable hands. Victor Sloane had supplied the phrase that made the whole thing snap into place. Someone on Riddle Street would soon pay dearly for silence and courtesy. Wolf liked that, because it stripped away the remaining social disguises. The meeting was not romantic, friendly, or accidental. It was transactional. Whoever sent the parcel wanted Gerald to believe that by admitting a private caller, he was about to gain money, leverage, or advantage. And because Gerald believed that, he did what vain and acquisitive men always do when they think profit is coming under its own power. He arranged to be alone with it. Chapter 7. The strings on the bottle. A murder will often wave one hand at you and hide the real business in the other. That is why Wolf distrusts anything obvious enough to look helpful before noon. By Tuesday morning, the whiskey bottle on Gerald Mowbray's desk had become, in the minds of at least 3 people, either poison, temptation, or atmosphere. Inspector Kramer, who came in scowling at 10:30 and sat down only because standing would have required more optimism, took the third view. The bottle is window dressing, he said. If it held poison, the lab would have found it. If it didn't, it's just part of the fancy package. Wolf, with a beer glass at his elbow and his eyes half shut, said. Number Kramer glared. No what? No. It is not just part of the package. It is part of the lie. That improved my morning. Kramer's eyebrows went up, which always gives him the expression of a man surprised by his own temper. I said, you might tell him before luncheon. He bruises easily. Wolf ignored me. He held up the inventory slip I had brought from Riddle Street the night before. Mowbray's own decanter on the side table was used. The gift bottle was not. Kramer grunted. So he preferred his usual drink. Number he preferred his usual ritual. The distinction matters. He turned to me, Archie. Yes, sir. State it. I had it ready because he had made me say it twice already. Mrs. Vale says Gerald poured himself a drink at 6 from the gift bottle when it first arrived, or what she thought was the gift bottle. Iris Dane says he sampled whiskey before dinner. Helen says the bottle from the parcel stood on the desk later, still handsome and full. Yesterday, when I checked the kitchen tray and the sideboard, I found the real answer. Gerald had poured from his own decanter while waiting in the study. The gift bottle had never been opened at all. Kramer turned to me. You sure? Yes. The seal was intact until the lab broke it. Gerald had been drinking, but not that. Wolf nodded. Therefore, the bottle was never meant to be consumed. It was meant to be seen. That was the hinge. The whiskey had not been sent to be drunk. It had been sent to complete a picture. Silver, rare spirit, elegant note, private hour, luxury as credential, Kramer said. That proves what? The sender had taste. It proves the sender understood Mowbray's eye better than his throat. Wolf said. The bottle was not refreshment. It was scenery, I added. And good scenery, expensive enough to look sincere, untouched enough to remain impressive. Wolf gave me the slightest glance of approval, which from him is a civic decoration. Yes, a man expecting a profitable secret interview likes to be reassured that he is dealing with someone serious, solvent, and suitably deferential. The unopened bottle served that purpose. Kramer snorted. That's psychology? No, Wolf said. It is arrangement. He pushed the bottle aside with one finger and reached for a length of cord in an envelope. Now we come to something less debatable. That item had come from a study drawer in Gerald Mowbray's desk. When I first saw it, it looked like nothing worth carrying home. 3 lengths of fine grey-brown cord, neatly coiled, used for bundling papers. But Wolf had made me bring them anyway, because he trusts what people leave in drawers more than what they put on display. Beside the cord from the drawer lay the cord from the parcel. At a glance they looked alike. At Wolf's glance, they became cousins, siblings, and then near twins. Kramer leaned forward. String. Wolf's lips compressed. Cord, twisted linen, narrow gauge, waxed lightly, not common shop twine. Maybe half the city uses it. No, I said. That's the pretty part. I told him what I had learned the day before. Gerald's papers were kept in several bundles, invoices, letters from dealers, auction notes, and certain private memoranda tied up with that same linen cord. Mrs. Vale didn't use it. Helen Mowbray never touched those packets if she could help it. Gerald himself used ribbon for anything ceremonial and rubber bands for anything temporary. Only one person in the house habitually used the grey-brown cord for bundling documents. Iris Dane. Kramer looked at Wolf. You sitting on that? I was waiting to see if your intelligence would surprise me. It did not. That got him a fresh scowl. Iris had a secretary's appetite for order. She liked packets tied square, labeled, and stacked. In the small correspondence room upstairs, I had found a whole box of the same linen cord in her desk tray, cut into practical lengths. She had said it came from a stationer and meant nothing, which may have been true, except that murder often leaves its fingerprint in the unnecessary detail. Wolf said exactly that. The cord on the parcel did not have to match anything in the house, he said. The sender could have used shop ribbon, ordinary string, or no cord at all. Instead, he used a material already present in Mowbray's domestic routine and distinctive enough to be noticed only after the fact. That is characteristic. Crime often betrays itself not by the necessary act, but by the unnecessary elegance. Kramer's gaze shifted to me. You're buying this. I'm well into ownership. He muttered something impolite and leaned back. The office had grown quiet, except for the city outside doing its Monday work badly. Wolf touched the cord with one broad fingertip. Observe the use of the bottle, he said. It exists to persuade. Observe the use of the cord. It exists to personalize. The sender wanted the parcel to look costly, apt, and somehow domestic to Mowbray's world. Not foreign, not shop-made, not theatrical. Familiar luxury. I said, so the bottle is an expensive fake, and the cord is a small betrayal. Not merely because she owned cord, because she understood the house's texture. She knew what would look natural on Mowbray's desk, and what would look merely purchased. Kramer grunted. Still doesn't kill him. No, Wolf said. But it narrows the hand that dressed the stage. That was what the chapter had been building toward all along. The unopened bottle stripped away one illusion, and the cord tightened another. Gerald had not been offered a drink by the sender. He had been offered an impression of refinement and means, and the parcel had not been tied with random string from a shop counter. It had been finished with material that belonged to the house's own habits, I said. There's more. If Iris tied documents with that cord, Gerald would see it without consciously seeing it. The parcel would feel right. Wolf nodded. Excellent. Familiarity often works below notice. One recognizes not an object, but its appropriateness. Like a forged signature that looks right at a glance. Something of the sort. Kramer stood up. If you want me to bring in Iris Dane, say so. Wolf glared at him. Certainly not. You would frighten her into caution and deprive me of utility. Sit down. Kramer did not sit, but he also did not leave, which with him is practically obedience. Wolf went on. We are not finished. The bottle tells us the parcel was theatrical, not poisonous. The cord tells us the sender had access to or knowledge of Iris Dane's materials. That may mean Iris herself, or someone close enough to her room or workable to borrow intelligently. That widens it again, I said. Number it deepens it. The crime was arranged by someone who understood not only Mowbray's pride, but the household's habits. That is better. I thought of Gerald's study as we had reconstructed it, lamp-lit card in hand, silver opener out of its case, unopened luxury bottle standing like a promise, not a man preparing to drink, a man preparing to receive the appearance of importance. Every object in the room had been chosen to tell him he was being approached correctly, and the cord, that little strip of linen no one would think of twice, had come trailing in from the daily machinery of the house itself. Murder often leaves its fingerprint in the unnecessary detail, Wolf said again, this time not to us but to the room. He was right. The necessary detail was simple: lure Gerald privately and kill him. But necessary details are often disguised successfully. The unnecessary ones are vain. They show taste, habit, ego, method, an unopened bottle, a particular cord. A parcel made not merely expensive, but convincing. Kramer finally went, taking his scowl with him. When the door had closed, I looked across at Wolf. Well, he said. Miss Dane now interests me very much indeed, because of the cord. Because of the cord, the style, the understanding of Mowbray's rituals, and the fact that she, more than anyone, lived at the junction of his papers, his vanities, and his private appointments. That sounds nearly like accusation. Number it sounds like progress. He reached for the beer and drank. Outside, a horn protested somewhere down the block. Inside, the old brownstone settled around us in books and warmth and cultivated silence. The whiskey bottle had seemed important because it was expensive. In fact, it mattered because it was untouched. Its luxury was performative. Its purpose was not to intoxicate Gerald Mowbray, but to reassure him. The finer clue was the smaller one, the cord around the parcel, matching the lengths in the study drawer, and the secretary's own supply. That was how the trap had been made convincing, not by extravagance alone, but by intimate correctness. And Nero Wolfe, who trusted unnecessary details more than necessary lies, had finally found a thread worth pulling. Chapter 8. The hand behind the ribbon. By Wednesday afternoon, suspicion had done what it usually does in a household murder. It had become both more concentrated and less trustworthy. That is one reason Wolfe despises it as a substitute for thought. Suspicion likes faces, thought prefers arrangements. Iris Dane had by then accumulated enough against her to satisfy a less exact mind. She handled Gerald Mowbray's correspondence, knew his habits in the intimate bureaucratic sense, had access to his desk, his appointments, his private files, and the practical materials of his daily life. The cord on the parcel matched hers. The style of the note was within her range. The parcel itself had the texture of something assembled by someone who knew not only what Gerald liked, but how he liked to be approached. Inspector Kramer, who came in at 4 with rain on his coat and impatience in his eyes, was ready to turn possibility into handcuffs. Well, he demanded from the red leather chair. You've got the secretary, haven't you? Wolfe, planted behind his desk with no more movement than a brown bear at rest, regarded him with distaste. Number Kramer scowled. Why not? Because I dislike arresting women merely because they are efficient. She had access. She had opportunity. She tied the cord on the package for all we know. For all you know, Wolfe said. I know more. I was at my desk pretending to order notes when really I was enjoying the performance. Wolfe in his superior mode and Kramer in his injured rhinoceros mode can improve a grey afternoon. Kramer turned to me. You buying his mystery act? I'm renting it by the chapter. Wolfe ignored us both. Method must still meet motive. Kramer snorted. Everybody had motive. Pifu, everybody had resentment. Motive requires particularity. That was the line of the day, and he knew it. The bell rang just then, which was one of those little amenities the universe occasionally extends to Nero Wolfe because it admires efficient timing. I went to the hall and came back with Helen Mowbray. She entered with that same composed directness she had shown from the start, but there was strain under it now, not disorder. She would probably remain composed at a shipwreck, but the effort showed. "You sent for me, Mr. Wolfe." "Yes, sit down." She sat, glanced once at Kramer, and then fixed on Wolfe. She had reached the stage of the case where one is tired of keeping one's own counsel and uncertain whether speaking will improve anything. "That is often the profitable stage," Wolfe said. "Your uncle was preparing some pressure upon Miss Dane. I think you know of it." Helen's eyes changed. "Only that. But it was enough." "Why do you think so?" she asked. "Because Gerald Mowbray had discovered something in the course of his business which enabled him to extract silence, courtesy, or money from someone close to him. He spoke of one person on Riddle Street paying dearly. The parcel that summoned him privately was chosen with intimate knowledge. The cord points toward Miss Dane's sphere. Yet Miss Dane herself, if she were the killer, would have required a sufficiently urgent reason to risk such an elaborate crime. Therefore the pressure concerned not herself alone, but someone for whom she would act." Helen looked down at her hands and then up again. "You make concealment feel indecent. It usually is." She drew breath. "My uncle had recently learned that Iris's brother, Matthew Dane, had forged a signature in one of the book transactions." Kramer leaned forward. "What transaction?" Helen did not look at him. She was speaking to Wolfe now, because most people, once they decide to tell the truth in his office, aim it naturally at the center of gravity. A consignment agreement involving an illuminated folio. Gerald had discovered discrepancies in the papers and finally traced them to a receipt signed in the name of a small dealer in Albany. The signature was false. Iris's brother had arranged the transfer and had signed where he had no right. Wolfe said, "Did Gerald confront Miss Dane?" "Not directly. He liked leverage to ripen. But he let enough fall to terrify her. He asked odd questions about Matthew. He remarked that fraud in book transactions is often prosecuted more vigorously than murder because it affronts men with catalogues. He even brought out the papers twice at dinner and then put them away again untouched." "That sounds like him," I said. Helen nodded, with no amusement in it. "Yes, he enjoyed pressure long before he enjoyed results." Kramer said, "And he was going to the police?" Helen hesitated. "Or threatening to. That was never clear with Uncle Gerald. He might have meant to do it. He might have meant only to frighten Iris into some concession. But 3 days before he died, I overheard him tell her in the study that signatures were dangerous things and that compensation often improved his temper." Wolfe's eyes narrowed. "Compensation." "Yes, there we are," he murmured. The office had gone very quiet. Rain touched the windows softly, as if even the weather had decided to keep still and listen. I looked at Helen, then at Wolfe, and the whole shape of the parcel altered at once. It had been easy, up to that point, to think of the gift as bait cast in the ordinary line of human meanness, greed, vanity, rivalry, the little domestic poisons. But this was cleaner and worse. Gerald had learned of Matthew Dane's forgery and was preparing to use it. He had begun to squeeze, not openly enough for defense, but plainly enough for fear. That meant Iris had not sent a social offering, nor even a purely commercial one. She had sent an answer to extortion. Wolfe said it for the room. The lavish gift changes shape. It was not fashioned from affection. It was fashioned from fear disguised as courtesy. Kramer grunted. "That's motive enough." "No," Wolfe said. "It is motive enough to tempt thought, not yet enough to close the account," I said. "Because fear might explain the parcel and the meeting, but not necessarily the murder." "Precisely." He turned to Helen. "Did Miss Dane know the full extent of what your uncle had discovered?" "I believe so. Or enough. She found one of the copied receipts on his desk and was badly shaken afterward." "Did she ask him for mercy?" Helen's mouth thinned. "Not in my hearing. Iris has too much pride." but she may have asked for terms. There, Wolf said. The phrase from the note came back with a better fit now, a profitable understanding. Gerald would take that at once to mean negotiation under pressure. If Iris, or someone acting for her, needed to recover or suppress the damaging papers, then the gift was not merely an introduction. It was an attempt to place him in exactly the mood most favorable to extortion in reverse, pleased with himself, privately, expectant, and ready to sell either silence or delay. I said, so Gerald thought he was about to be paid for keeping quiet. Yes, Wolf said, and that belief led him straight into isolation. Kramer stood up. I've heard enough. I'm picking up Iris Dane. No, Wolf snapped. Kramer glared. Why the devil not? Because if you arrest her now, you may satisfy your appetite and ruin my dinner. That's not police procedure. It should be. Kramer turned red, which with him is like a weather report. You've got motive, access, the note, the cord. I have fear, familiarity, and arrangement, Wolf said. I do not yet have the hand that killed Gerald Mowbray. Kramer jabbed a finger. You think someone else did it? I think, Wolf said with killing patience, that an elaborate lure may be prepared by one person and exploited by another, or that Miss Dane intended negotiation and found events overtaking intention, or that she acted wholly and is a murderess. At present all remain possible. I do not accuse on a menu. That was Wolf at his best and most maddening. He would not call the game before he had counted all the cards, even if the room was already betting on one suit. After Kramer left in a sulphurous condition, Helen remained seated. She looked drained now, not by grief, but by relief purchased too late. You will have to tell her, she said. Perhaps, Wolf replied. She did love her brother stupidly, perhaps, but entirely. That is not uncommon. No, Helen said, nor is Gerald's sort of cruelty. When she had gone, I turned to Wolf. Well, he said, closing his eyes. Miss Dane now possesses motive adequate to intelligence. That sounds official. It is exact. She knew Gerald's tastes. She handled his papers. She had access to his house, his routines, and his weaknesses. And now we know why she, or someone close to her, needed a private audience so badly, not to charm him, but to stop him. I got up and crossed to the desk. Then the gift, the note, the cord, all of it. Yes, a language of courtesy spoken under compulsion, and the brother, Matthew Dane, must be found. That's work. That, Wolf said, opening one eye, is why I retain you. I let that pass because he was right and because there was no point arguing with arithmetic. The shape of the case had changed again, but not by widening, by clarifying. Suspicion had narrowed onto Iris Dane because she stood at the center of Gerald's habits and had the practical knowledge to fashion a trap he would trust. But Wolf had refused to accuse her prematurely because method must still meet motive. And until Helen spoke, motive had lacked its hard edge. Now it had one. Gerald had discovered her brother's forgery and was preparing to turn the matter over to the police, unless compensated. Or at least, unless his appetite for compensation had been fed. The lavish parcel was therefore no longer a curiosity, nor even merely a lure. It was fear dressed in good wrapping. Fear that knew exactly how to bow before Gerald Mowbray's vanity, while trying to save a guilty man from prison. Chapter 9. The meeting no one was meant to hear by Thursday afternoon. Wolf had the case in that stage he enjoys most, and I enjoy least. The stage where he knows enough to become cryptic. He had spent the morning in the office, descending only from the plant rooms and breakfast to install himself behind the desk with a stack of notes. The copied card, the laboratory report on the unopened whiskey seal, and my memoranda on cords, receipts, signatures, and everybody's motives from family grievance to panic. He had read, drunk beer, shut his eyes, opened them, asked me twice for facts I had already given him, and grunted in a manner intended to convey that my continued employment was one of the major enigmas of the century. At 3 he said, Archie. Yes, sir. Sit down. I sat. He folded his hands over the blotter. We now have the shape. That sounds like a man withholding the middle. Number merely sparing you the worst of your own mistakes. That is service. He ignored it. Miss Dane sent the gift and the card. That's not a question. Number because of the cord, the style, the intimate knowledge of Gerald's tastes, and the pressure over her brother. Yes, but chiefly because the parcel was not the work of someone seeking revenge in a gross form. It was the work of someone constrained by urgency and compelled to speak in a language Gerald Mowbray would respect. Courtesy, precisely. Fear disguised as courtesy. That had been clear enough since Helen Mowbray had told us about Matthew Dane's forgery and Gerald's growing appetite to squeeze profit from it. Gerald had discovered the false signature in one of the book transactions and had begun pressing Iris obliquely with that leisurely cruelty certain men mistake for intelligence. He was preparing either to turn the matter over to the police, or more likely, to see what silence might fetch before morality inconvenienced him. So Iris sends the parcel, I said. Good whiskey he won't drink, silver he'll admire, a note promising a profitable understanding if he sees her alone. Yes, you think he knew it was her? Wolf's eyes narrowed. He suspected it strongly enough, perhaps not from the handwriting which was disguised, but from the subject, the timing, and his own vanity. He had been hinting at compensation. A private overture offering profit would naturally point toward the person under pressure. Then why keep it secret from the house? Because secrecy increased his advantage. If he expected Miss Dane to come privately, perhaps with money, papers, or an appeal, he would not want witnesses. Witnesses turn extortion into evidence. That was Gerald all over. A man who prized possession over affection would naturally prize privacy when possession was about to improve itself. Wolf continued. Miss Dane entered the study after the household had gone quiet. The servants were dismissed. Helen had been sent off. The room was arranged. Gerald had the card, the silver opener. The unopened bottle displayed as proof he had understood and accepted the form of the approach. And then, Wolf said, comes the point at which an intended bargain becomes fatal. I waited, he sighed, which with him means he regrets the existence of interlocutors. Iris Dane went there intending either to bargain or to plead. Perhaps she brought money, perhaps only promises, perhaps merely the hope that Gerald's vanity, once satisfied by the form of the approach, would make him lenient. But she misjudged him. That's a safe bet for anybody. Yes, Gerald would not merely ask terms. He would enlarge them. He would enjoy her fear. He would delay, imply police, perhaps demand more than money, continued obedience. Future cooperation, access to papers, who knows? The exact terms are unimportant. The pressure is. I thought of Gerald in that study with the lamp on the desk, the hearth throwing warmth at his back, the silver letter opener lying where he had placed it partly as ornament and partly as a sign that he had appreciated the gift intelligently. Across from him, Iris Dane, controlled and desperate, trying to save her brother from a forgery charge that could ruin him. I said, and when she showed desperation, he pressed harder. Of course. Then he reached for the bell. Wolf's eyes opened fully. Exactly. That had not yet been proved in words, but it fit everything. Gerald liked private pressure until he saw a chance to improve it by summoning witnesses at the right moment. The bell rope or push button, depending on which arrangement he had in that room, would let him bring in a servant, not for rescue in the melodramatic sense, but for dominance. A witness changes the balance. It turns a plea into humiliation. I said, he might have threatened to call Helen in, or Mrs. Vale, or just to have Iris shown out after making her plead. Yes, or to fetch papers, or to telephone, or merely to remind her that under his roof he controlled whether privacy continued. That was enough. A woman already driven to send a disguised gift and come alone at night to bargain over her brother's forgery would not stand much more pressure before panic tipped into motion. Wolf said. The struggle was brief. There was no sign of one. Precisely, no prolonged struggle. No overturned furniture. No cry heard clearly by the household. Therefore, the critical movement was sudden, close, and decisive. Gerald was near the hearth when last seen. He would likely have remained standing or half-seated during the sharper exchange. The silver letter opener was within arm's reach on the desk or table beside him. You think she grabbed it when he moved for the bell? Yes. I could see it too easily now. Gerald leaning toward the bell pull or button, perhaps with some final polished cruelty on his lips. Iris seeing the whole thing about to collapse, not merely the bargain, but her brother's chance, her own position in the house, the certainty of exposure. The silver blade right there, part of the gift that had summoned the interview, transformed in one instant from decoration to weapon, I said, and she stabbed him. Yes, how many times? Once, probably, enough. A letter opener is not a fine killing instrument, but in close quarters, under force and panic, it can be entirely sufficient. Which is why the wound was overlooked at first, as less obvious than it should have been. Wolf grunted. A narrow puncture, perhaps partly concealed by the fall of the body and the clothing. The physician, expecting apoplexy or heart failure in an elderly man, may have seen death before he saw cause. That was not unfair. People often see what they are equipped to expect, I said. Then after, Wolf said. Miss Dane had only moments. She leaves the room quietly, closes the study door, and trusts the house to remain still long enough for death to settle into apparent naturalness. The parcel remains. The silver opener may even be wiped or left, where confusion will delay understanding. She depends on Gerald's age, his heart, and the privacy of the meeting to blur the line between accident, fright, and homicide. The office stayed quiet for a long moment. Outside, New York was doing its usual indifferent roaring a few walls away. Inside, with the books and the rugs and the lamp and Wolf's immense self-confidence holding the room together, a private midnight killing had become horribly plain. I said, "Can you prove the bell part?" Not directly. Then Kramer will bark. Yes, but he will bark in a more informed direction. He leaned back. The important point is that no one was meant to hear the meeting. The gift, the note, the time, the insistence on privacy, the quiet entry, the lack of public accusation afterward, all show an interview arranged for secrecy from the outset. Miss Dane did not plan a public confrontation. She planned a private settlement. And when settlement failed, it became violence. There was the chapter, not a premeditated stabbing in the crude sense, not a murderer arriving with weapon drawn and appetite ready. Something at once more understandable and less forgivable. An interview born in fear, turned poisonous by Gerald's habits, and ended with the nearest sharp thing in the room. I said, "You sound almost sympathetic." "No," Wolf said sharply. "I am exact. Sympathy is irrelevant." She chose deceit, secrecy, and a midnight interview, rather than law. He chose blackmail, rather than decency. Between them, they produced a corpse. That was fair. At 5:30, Inspector Kramer came back, as if called by the smell of approaching accusation. Wolf gave him the reconstruction in a cleaned and polished version. Kramer listened, arms folded, jaw set. When Wolf finished, he said, "So your secretary baited him, went in to bargain over her brother's forgery, lost her nerve when he leaned on her, and stuck him with the same fancy knife she sent in the first place." "Yes, that's neat. It is accurate." "Maybe." Kramer scowled. "But you still need her to crack or some physical tie on the weapon." Wolf's eyes half closed. "I know. I am not a village idiot." "No," Kramer said. "Just difficult." After he had gone, I looked at Wolf. "You're saving the office gathering for tomorrow." "Obviously. And you think she'll break?" "I think," Wolf said, "that Helen Mowbray, Nathan Bell, Victor Sloan, and Iris Dane each know parts of this and are trusting silence to preserve them. Put them in one room with the shape complete and pressure properly applied, and silence will begin to leak." He reached for the beer. The final evening at Riddle Street had now taken its proper form. Iris Dane had sent the gift and the card to lure Gerald into believing he would receive a profitable offer in exchange for silence about her brother's forgery. She had gone to him once the household had quieted, not to murder at the outset, but to negotiate from desperation. Gerald, being Gerald, did not stop at terms. He pressed, humiliated, and moved to summon control. The instant he sensed, fear had given him the upper hand. And then, the thing no one was meant to hear happened in a few seconds close to the hearth. A sharp movement, a reach for the bell, a hand for the silver blade, one blow, silence. The weapon had been lying in plain sight from the moment the parcel was opened, which meant the gift had not merely brought Gerald Mowbray to his death. It had laid the instrument on his desk and waited for panic to pick it up. I can continue in the same original, classic-inspired Wolf Feet-Archy mode, without copying Rex Stout's exact wording. Chapter 10. The ribbon drawn tight on Thursday at 6 o'clock, the office on West 35th Street, contained the usual ingredients for one of Wolf's domestic ceremonies. Chairs drawn in from the front room, a yellow lamplight made warmer by the weather, outside being mean. Beer for those who could be trusted not to spill it, and enough concealed discomfort to furnish a boarding house. Inspector Kramer was there in a condition of active skepticism. Helen Mowbray sat very straight and looked as if composure had become expensive. Nathan Bell had the air of a man who had lent money too often and trust too far. Victor Sloane was elegant, faintly amused, and plainly uneasy beneath it. Iris Dane sat at the end of the semicircle in a dark dress, with her hands folded in her lap and her face under exact control. If she had been going to a funeral instead of the autopsy of her own choices, she could not have been better prepared. Wolf, behind his desk, looked from one to the other and let silence accumulate. He uses it the way other men use hammers. At length he said, "Gerald Mowbray died because he believed a gift." No one moved. The parcel sent to him on the morning of his death, Wolf continued, was not an act of affection, apology, or courtesy in any genuine sense. It was an instrument. Every object in it was selected to touch a separate weakness: the silver letter opener for his vanity in trade, the whiskey for his taste, the card for his appetite for secret advantage, the wrapping and cord for familiarity. It was bait fashioned with intimate knowledge. Victor Sloane shifted and crossed one leg. "That much you have made clear already, Mr. Wolf. I am not speaking for your benefit, Mr. Sloane. I am speaking for truth." He turned his eyes to Iris Dane. "Miss Dane sent that parcel." Iris's face did not change at once. It only became stiller, which is sometimes a greater change. Kramer leaned forward. "There it is." Wolf lifted a finger at him without turning his head. "Be quiet." Kramer shut his mouth the way a dog does when it has been told to leave the roast alone, but not the room. Wolf continued. Miss Dane handled Gerald Mowbray's correspondence, his appointments, and his domestic business habits. She knew his preferred whiskey, his fondness for silver with professional flavor, and his habit of keeping delicate matters off the dining table, and inside the study with the door closed. The cord on the parcel matched that used in the house for bundling documents, and kept among her own materials. The style of the note was a disguised but competent version of the formal restraint she practiced daily. More important, she had reason. He looked now at the room rather than at her alone. Gerald Mowbray had discovered that Matthew Dane, Miss Dane's brother, had forged a signature in one of the manuscript transactions. Mowbray did not immediately go to the police, because decency was rarely his first instinct. Instead, he began to exert pressure. He hinted, delayed, enlarged the danger, and made it plain that silence, like everything else in his life, might be made profitable. Nathan Bell muttered, "That sounds like Gerald." Helen Mowbray said nothing, but her eyes closed once and opened again. Wolf nodded. Yes, Miss Dane understood that he expected an offer. Therefore, she gave him one, not in substance at first, but in form. She sent a lavish gift, because only lavishness would flatter him enough to dismiss suspicion and clear the house for a private meeting. Iris spoke then. Her voice was low and even. "You make it sound very simple." "It was not simple," Wolf said. "It was elaborate, and therefore more foolish. Simple would have been to go to the police, or to a lawyer. You chose theater." That struck. The control in her face wavered the smallest fraction. Wolf went on. The card promised a profitable understanding. Mowbray, vain enough to think himself a connoisseur of private desperation, understood perfectly. He dismissed the servants early. He arranged the parcel on his desk. He kept the silver opener out where its appropriateness could be admired. He stood waiting in the study, pleased, not by kindness, but by the prospect of gain. Victor Sloane said dryly, "That too sounds like Gerald." "Yes," Wolf said. "You all knew him. That is what made the crime possible." He turned back to Iris. "You entered the study after the house had gone quiet. You intended to bargain, perhaps to plead, perhaps to pay, certainly to stop him from turning your brother over to the police." Iris's hands tightened once in her lap. "That was all, but it was enough." "Gerald pressed harder than you expected," Wolf said. "He enjoyed your fear. He may have increased his demands when he saw how near desperation had brought you. At some point he moved to summon help. Not because he feared you physically, but because he wished to change the balance. A witness at that moment would have humiliated you and made retreat impossible." Helen's eyes lifted to Iris then, and for the first time there was pity in them as well as dread. Wolf's voice remained cold. "The silver letter opener lay within reach because you had put it there for him. In the struggle you seized it and struck." Kramer said sharply. "How many times?" "Once," Wolf replied. "One thrust was enough." Miss Dane left the room quietly and trusted Mowbray's age, his weak condition, and the privacy of the meeting to delay recognition of homicide. The office was very quiet. Rain touched the windows lightly, then stopped, as if reconsidering. The city outside kept on being itself, but the room had contracted to the desk, the chairs, and Iris Dane's still face. She looked at Wolf for a long time, then at Helen, then down at her own hands. When she spoke again, the evenness had gone. "Yes," she said. Nobody moved. "Yes," she repeated. "I sent the parcel." Kramer let out a breath that sounded almost like satisfaction, and almost like regret. He had expected noise. Instead he got the smaller sound truth makes when it gives up and sits down. Iris lifted her head. "I chose extravagance because it was the only language he trusted. If I had written plainly, he would have sneered. If I had begged, he would have called Helen in to hear it. If I had sent money without form, he would have raised the price before opening the envelope. It had to be silver, good whiskey, good paper, everything polished, everything suggesting respect and profit. Only that would make him feel superior enough to be careless." Nathan Bell muttered, "Dear God." She went on, not looking at him. "It was never kindness. I never meant it as kindness. Every object in that box was chosen as bait. I knew he would admire the silver. I knew he would value the whiskey without even drinking it, if it looked right. I knew he would enjoy the secrecy, because secrecy let him pretend to be grander than ordinary greed." Her voice tightened on the last word. Wolf said nothing. That was wise. Confessions improve when not interrupted. "I meant to stop him," she said. "I meant to bargain, to find out how much he wanted, whether there was any limit to it, whether he would give me the papers if I brought him enough. I don't know whether I would have paid him. I only knew I had to try before he went to the police and dragged Matthew through the courts." "Then what happened?" Kramer asked. Iris turned to him. "Exactly what Mr. Wolf said. He let me speak for perhaps 2 minutes. Then he smiled. I had never hated a human smile until then. He said I had finally learned the cost of discourtesy. He wanted money. Yes, but not only money. He wanted future obedience, access to things. Information. He wanted me to remain in that house and belong to his fear." Her mouth twisted. "And when I showed what I was afraid of, he enjoyed it." Helen drew breath softly and said, "Yes." Iris nodded once as if thanking her for the permission of being believed. Then he moved toward the bell, not quickly, deliberately. He said, "If I wish to continue the discussion, we might as well have a witness to my manners." I thought he meant Mrs. Vale, or Helen. I saw the whole thing in a flash. My brother exposed, myself degraded, Gerald pleased forever with it. Her eyes lifted to the desk, as if the letter opener were still there. I took the silver knife. I scarcely remember how. It was my own gift, and it felt absurdly heavy. He half turned when I moved. Then it was done. No one spoke. She closed her eyes briefly. "I did not plan that part. I planned everything else, and that was enough. That, Wolf said, is often the trouble. Kramer stood. Miss Dane. She rose before he could say more. The dignity in it was not innocence, but it was real. I won't make trouble, Inspector. He moved to her side, but did not touch her yet. Even Kramer, who has seen all the species of human waste, knows when silence is the cleaner method. Wolf looked at Nathan Bell. Your manuscript matter may now be disentangled from this murder, though not from its own stains. Helen Mowbray, the study at Riddle Street should remain sealed until the district attorney has had his people through it again. The ribbon from the parcel, the cord, the card, and the letter opener will be retained as evidence. Helen nodded. She looked not at Wolf, but at Iris. If there is anything lawful I can do for your brother, I will consider it. Iris's face changed then for the first time into something not controlled at all. It was gratitude, shock, and misery in one brief collapse. Then she steadied again. Thank you, she said. Kramer took her away. When the door had closed behind them, Victor Sloane got to his feet and smoothed his cuff. Well, Riddle Street preserves its standards. Even extortion comes gift, wrapped. That, Wolf said, will do from you. Sloane inclined his head and went. Bell followed after a short murmur to Helen, and then Helen herself, after standing a moment by the red leather chair, as though uncertain whether to sit or flee, finally said to Wolf, My uncle would have admired the ingenuity if it had been used on someone else. Yes, Wolf said, that was part of the misfortune. When she had gone, leaving only me and Wolf in the office with the beer, the books and the slight stale hush that follows a confession, I stretched my legs and exhaled. Well, I said. The ribbon drew tight, Wolf grunted. A vulgar metaphor. A good one. He shut his eyes. Miss Dane chose correctly in one respect. Only a lavish gift would have satisfied Mowbray's vanity enough to make him feel not endangered, but elevated. He walked willingly into privacy because he believed himself master of the terms. And every polished object in the parcel was bait. Yes. I looked at the envelope on his desk containing the card and the bit of dark ribbon that had bound the package. Funny thing, ribbon. Decorative when first tied, incriminating when cut loose and laid flat under lamplight. A line of color that had made luxury look complete and now sat in an evidence envelope, waiting to help hang a life. Wolf said, on Riddle Street, as in many places, gifts are seldom free. Every favor carries a thread, and every thread may tighten into a noose. He opened one eye. You have an irritating gift for summary. I practice. Outside, the rain had stopped. Riddle Street, I knew, would by now be settling back into its old habit, brownstones with respectable facades, windows lit above narrow stoops, polite faces, careful voices, old money, older resentments. The study in Gerald Mowbray's house would be sealed for a time. The ribbon from the parcel would remain in police custody. The silver opener would be tagged and measured and spoken of by men who had no feeling for silver at all. Helen would inherit a silence larger than the one she had lived under, and Iris Dane, who had wrapped fear in elegance because plain fear would have been laughed at, would discover too late that style is a poor disguise. For desperation once, blood has answered it. That is how it ended. Not with mystery remaining, but with all the threads drawn visible. Gerald Mowbray had mistaken tribute for safety and secrecy for control. Iris Dane had mistaken planning for command, and one instant of panic for escape. Nero Wolfe had mistaken nothing. He had taken a parcel apart until it spoke, then taken a household apart until it did the same. And Riddle Street, having yielded up one more private ruin, went back to smiling with its doors closed.